So what we've been talking about is this soul. The Alter Rebbe has prefaced, has introduced us, has found the entryway into the topic of his discussion in his book, as predicated on this idea that is found in the writings of the Arizal, in the writings of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the great 16th century Kabbalist of Tzfat, who talks about two souls: a soul, a holy soul, or as it's going to be called in Tanya, a godly soul, a divine soul, and an impure soul, or as he calls it in Tanya, the animal soul. And again, I think calling it the animalistic soul might be a better translation, and we'll actually get into this more in today's discussion, because animal soul sounds like you're talking about the soul of an animal. I mean, we talk about an nefesh habahamit, an animalistic soul. We're talking actually about the human soul. We're just saying that it is animalistic in its orientation, as opposed to the soul of an animal, which would be appropriate for an animal, or the soul of a rock, which would be appropriate for a rock. But he doesn't get into the rocks yet in this part of Tanya. That is another. It relates to another topic, which is the unity of God, the oneness of God. So that's, that we'll leave at that. But here, what he wants to bring up to us is to understand the dynamics of the conflict inside of us between good and bad, and through that to get us into the path that a person can achieve their maximum potential as far as the intent and the purpose which God put them in this world. So if you want to reach your potential, let's say, if you want to fulfill your purpose, you have to first know what that purpose is. So in order to understand that, we have to understand the dynamics of these two souls. So in this chapter, in the end of chapter 1, he discusses the soul, the impure soul, that he calls the soul of Kelipah. And I want to talk a little bit more about Kelipah again, although we've discussed it before. And then in the next chapter, chapter 2, he's going to begin discussing the divine soul. Okay, so we're not going to begin chapter 2 today. That would be foolhardy. So he uses the term Kelipah. Kelipah bears defining because it's a term that's going to come up very often. The basic breakdown, the basic binary of Kelipah and Kedusha, of which is the unholy and the holy, are like foundational to the entirety of Tanya. So you have to understand that when we talk about in the world of Kabbalah, in the study of Kabbalah, in the science of Kabbalah, there are technical terms that are used. So these are words that, just like you have in philosophy also, they're words that ordinary people might use in ordinary conversation also, but they have a very special meaning in the Kabbalistic context, as in the philosophical context. Just to give you one example, and this is a philosophical example, there's a Hebrew word etzem. If you ask an Israeli what etzem means, they'll tell you it means a bone. In philosophy, etzem means the essence. But it's just an example that when you use that term in a philosophical context, and Kabbalah uses that term also, so it's a good term to know. It has a special meaning. It has a specific meaning. And what happens with technical terms is that they're given a definition, not necessarily in one place. Sometimes, and this happens in Tanya as well, the definition is something that you piece together over time as you're studying, and the term keeps coming up, and other things are, uh, said about it. So you begin to get a picture of what it means. But ultimately, you use the term itself because it comes with all that whole package of meaning that you can't, go through every time. So that's why you have the term. So this klipa, there's what I'll translate as that which is unholy, and the counterpart to that is kedusha, that which is holy. So the holy we'll talk about, and that's for next time. But here he's talking about the soul that derives from klipa. So one of the things he says about the soul is that all the bad mentalities and character traits and tendencies, inclinations in a person come from the soul of klipa. So, for example, anger, arrogance, sloth, boasting. So all that is from klipa. So we read actually a kind of surprising line at the end of last week's class. We'll go over it again now, where the Alter Rebbe says that the gam midot tovot, even the good inclinations, the good characteristics, shevetava kol Yisrael b'toldotam, that is by nature, by the inborn nature of every Jew, kemo rachmanut u'gmilut chasadim, such as compassion and acts of loving kindness, baot mimena, they also derive from this soul of klipa, from this unholy soul within them. So we would assume that the good characteristics, compassion, loving kindness, these things would come from the holy side, and yet he's saying they come from this soul of klipa. So he explains, Ki Yisrael never zod the klipa himi klipat noga, because in Israel and among the Jewish people, this unholy soul is from the level of unholiness, that the level of klipa that is called noga, and I'll explain that term in a moment. Sheyesh ba gam kein tov, the klipat noga has in it good as well. Vihi misod etz hadat tov hara, and it comes from the mystery of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about this term noga. Noga is also a word that would be familiar to many Israelis, probably as somebody's name. I don't know how many Israelis actually know what noga means. Noga means light. But the idea is that what he's going to talk about, these are all ideas, again, they're Kabbalistic ideas that come from the Kabbalistic masters, and the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, is drawing on them. He's not inventing them here. He's just drawing on these terms, and he is giving it his interpretation. So there are what are called the three entirely unclean klipot, the three levels of unholiness that are absolute. You could call them opaque. And then there's a fourth level of klipa, which is translucent. Yeah. In other words, there's some light that shines through. What that means is that it's a mixture of good and evil, as opposed to the entirely unclean klipot that are completely opaque. They don't let any divine light through. They're completely bad. So we have this concept, the story in the Torah of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In Kabbalah, this represents a kind of unholiness, because it was against God's will to partake of this tree. But the level of unholiness is one that is a mixture of good and evil. which means that there is a kind of good that could derive from unholiness. In other words, it could be not necessarily godly. And again, we'll talk about this more in chapter 6, but over there, he explains that when you say that something is holy or godly, it means that it is entirely, it has voided itself completely from its own ego, from its own identity, to the extent that it is only a channel through which God reveals himself. So, for example, a mitzvah, right? When we do a mitzvah, when we perform a commandment of the Torah, that act is a holy act. Why is it a holy act? Because the entire objective of that act is to fulfill God's will. There's no personal motive involved, right? For my personal motives, I would never do it. I'm doing it because this is what God commands me. There's actually a teaching in the Talmud that mitzvot lav lehanot nitnu. The commandments were not given for personal benefit. So therefore, for example, if a person swore off having any benefits from a certain item, but he has to do a mitzvah, then you can use that item for the mitzvah because it's not considered a benefit to you, right? That's on a legal halakhic level. The objective of doing the mitzvah is not for your benefit. It's not when you eat supper. That's for your benefit. You're doing it because you don't want to be hungry, because you want to have energy, you want to be healthy, etc. Right? There's a personal motive there. When you do a mitzvah, you're not doing the mitzvah for a personal motive. In fact, regardless of whether you're going to be rewarded for the mitzvah, you're not supposed to do a mitzvah for personal motive. You're supposed to do it because that's what God wants. So even if you're thinking about that God is going to reward me for this, that's also not the ideal way of doing the mitzvah. But even assuming that somebody did the mitzvah because God is going to reward them for it, the act of the mitzvah is an act that is done that is completely subservient to God. It's completely submitted to God. There's no personal motive there. That's what it means when you say that something is holy or godly. It's not simply that it's good, but that it is entirely altruistic. It's entirely for God's sake. So, and this is going to come up again. So it bears repeating it many times. But anything less than that, anything that has some personal motive in it, is already from the realm of Kelipah. It's already something that, even if it's good and even if it's okay, even if it's not forbidden, but it still relates to Kelipah because it is let's say self-centered. Okay, so let's come back to what we're talking about over here, and note that he puts in a key word here. I mean, a key, which is that this is a soul b'Yisrael, in Israel, among the Jewish people. So he's going to now contrast this to the way that this soul exists among non-Jews. So the first thing that we have to actually talk about is this concept of the distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew. We know that there's a concept, a term that's out there of the Jewish people being the chosen nation, and this is a term that's found in the Torah. We say it every day in our prayers. We say, blessed are you, Hashem, who has chosen us from among all the nations and given us His Torah. So, which is also something to note, right? That the prayer talks about God choosing the Jewish people in the context of His giving us His Torah. The two go together. But a person could say, So with regard to the Torah, what is the whole idea of choosing a nation? If God wanted to give the Torah, let God give the Torah without choosing a nation. Why does he have to choose a nation? What is the Torah? If the commandments of the Torah are simply the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, the proper thing to do, whatever, God's will, this is what God wants us to do, then what does that have to do with which nation you belong to? It has to do with who's doing it. If you follow the Torah, then you're doing God's will. And if you don't follow the Torah, then you're not doing God's will. Doesn't matter if you're I don't know, if you're Native American or if you're Indian or from the Polynesian Islands. Well, it's interesting that whether it's the Mormons or whether it's the Christians or whether it's the Muslims, they all have this concept of a chosen nation, which is essentially Israel. They just say that means that, but they all feel that there's a certain kind of chosenness, and it is important to distinguish between the Jewish idea of chosenness and this distinction in the way that it could be used among other peoples. But I think that there are a number of important points and important reasons of why the distinction between Jew and non-Jew is necessary and is important, and it's not just a matter of doing right or not doing right. And in fact, we say that the Torah was not given to the whole world. The Torah was given to the Jewish people. There is something called the seven mitzvahs, the seven commandments of the descendants of Noah, the seven Noahide laws, that is for the entire world. But that is an adjunct to the Torah. In other words, God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, and he gave the Jewish people the responsibility to teach the world about the seven Noahide laws. But it's not the same thing. In other words, let's take Shabbat, for example, right? The Sabbath. So the Sabbath is something which the Jewish people are supposed to rest on the Sabbath. It's not something that God expects everybody to do, or even wants everybody to do. If you're Jewish, then you're supposed to keep the Sabbath. We say in the Torah says, when we say it in the Sabbath prayers, that V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbat, that the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, and it is a sign between, God says, it's a sign between me and the children of Israel. So it's specifically for the Jewish people. So it's not a matter of right and wrong, because if it was right and wrong, then you say if it's right to rest on the Sabbath, then everybody should do it. And if it's fine not to rest on the Sabbath, then what is the Sabbath all about? But we're saying something. So we're saying something about the meaning, the significance of a mitzvah, and we're saying something about the significance of our identity. Therefore,
When we say Jews should be a light unto the nations, doesn't that mean we should share the Torah with them?
right. So it means sharing parts of the Torah, but not the entire Torah. There's a lot of ideas in Judaism, teachings about God, teachings about the laws that pertain to all people, not only the Jewish people, but actually the primary way that the Jewish people are meant to be a light to the nations is by the Jewish people living as God has instructed us, and that everybody can look at us and say, this is the way that people as close to God lives, and be inspired by that to themselves do what is correct for them, but not necessarily that everything that is in the Torah is something that must be shared with the the whole world. Okay, so this is a talking about philosophy. What we're saying is that we're talking about ontology. We're talking about something that is basic to the nature of the thing, and not just a circumstance. So, like, we're saying that the difference between a Jew and a non-Jew is ontological. It's not simply a matter of behavior. In some ways, that would be more offensive. Because if you say it's a matter of behavior, then you're saying that we behave better than non-Jews. Is not always the case. And that, but it also tells us something about the Torah. It tells us that the significance of the Torah is not because it teaches us right and wrong. Because again, there are many things in the Torah that's not a matter of right and wrong. It's a matter of right for who or wrong for who. What does that mean? That means that the purpose of doing the mitzvah is not in order to make the world a more ethical place or a more kinder place. That also happens. That also is part of it, and is a benefit of keeping the Torah. A person follows the Torah, they also lead an upright life and a rational life, a well lived life in many ways. We're talking on Shabbat about the valuing family and things like that. So if somebody follows the Torah and they say, okay, there's a mitzvah of honoring your parents, and there's a mitzvah of being fruitful and multiplying, and there's a mitzvah of educating your children and things like that. These are a lot of values that are not necessarily high on the priority list in the secular world. So you say, okay, you come out ahead, even if you're not so smart. If you follow the Torah, you did the right thing. You had children, and you gave your children values that are beneficial for them and beneficial for you, and it's beautiful. So that's there too, but that is not the core. It's not the etzem, right? That doesn't get to the etzem, to the essence of what the Torah is all about. The primary core idea of the Torah is that the Torah is God's will and God's wisdom. That the commandments that are given to the Torah is God's will, and that's the true reason, or the full reason for why they are important. Yes, there are benefits to following the Torah, but God didn't tell us, for example, to keep kosher because non-kosher food is not good for our health. In fact, there are plenty of people who eat non-kosher food and then quite healthy and they're doing well. So that's also not the case. But even if it were the case, that's not the point. The reason why we're doing it is because this is God's will. Because by doing this, we're doing God's will. In other words, doing God's will is the way that we connect to God, and is the purpose for why God put our souls on this world. And so I want to know, how do I do God's will? And so I open the Torah, and the Torah tells me the 630 commandments, these are the laws, whatever it is, and that's how I do God's will. And if you ask me, what's the point of this detail or that detail, maybe there is a reason, maybe there is an explanation that I know or that I could give or whatever, but ultimately we're not doing it because of that explanation. If I told you all of the benefits of resting on the Sabbath, right? It's all good, beautiful. We need time away from our phones. We need time together with family. There's all, we need a day off. You can't work every day or whatever. All of that. Let's say that's all true. If the Torah had not commanded me to rest on the Sabbath, I wouldn't do it. Because, and the proof is that those that are not following the Torah don't rest on the Sabbath. Why? There's benefits, and you could have those benefits in other ways also. You could rest on Wednesday too, and it would have more or less the same effect. The real reason why we rest on the Sabbath is because this is what God wants of us. And if I'm seeking to have a relationship with God, then my question is, what can I do that will be meaningful to God? And the answer is, that's what He gave us the Torah for. Torah tells us what I can do will be meaningful to God. And the flip side of that is that since He did not give the Torah to the nations of the world, it doesn't have the same meaning for a non-Jew to rest on the Sabbath, for example, because it's not meaningful to God coming from that. It's meaningful to God if they do the 7 mitzvahs that relate to them. If they lead an upright life, a life of faith, and a life of morality, which is basically what is encompassed in these 7 Noahide laws, and that's what God wants. Then that's where God finds their actions, gratifying and fulfilling. But the idea that God chose the Jewish people means at one level, therefore, when we do these commandments, that has special meaning for Him, and that is the primary meaning of the mitzvah. Yeah. So when we talk about, it's an interesting thing that, and I think that these two things are not a contradiction, even though they may seem to be. When we look at the Rebbe's thoughts, it's fascinating. On the one hand, the Rebbe, reached out to every demographic, and he, spoke openly and urgently about the idea of bringing the 7 Noahide laws to the world, to the peoples of the world. Till today, every year, there's on the Rebbe's birthday, there's a proclamation given out by the president for Education Day USA, and in that proclamation, there's an acknowledgement of the 7 Noahide laws, and it's something that the Rebbe spoke a lot about, and especially from the mid '80s on. On the other hand, one of the things that I think is so emphasized by the Rebbe throughout his talks is the distinction between Jew and non-Jew. It's like it's something that he never modifies. So, I think, at least in part, what that's about is that the Jewish people have to know who they are, and we cannot allow ourselves to, or even convince ourselves for all kinds of reasons that we're no different from the other nations of the world. We should know that we are different. We need to be different. We have a duty. We have a duty towards God, number one, right? Because if we're like everybody else, then we can also be satisfied with being as good or as okay as everybody else, and say that okay, there may be some peculiarities of Jewish culture. Maybe there's certain holidays that we celebrate that are different from the holidays that other people celebrate, or maybe there's certain foods that we eat that are different from the foods that other people eat. But it doesn't have any real meaning to it. It's simply a cultural thing. But at the basis, we're all citizens of the world, And basically what's expected of me is expected of them, what's expected of them is expected of me. That's not really the purpose of the Jewish people in the world. First of all, towards God, God, what God expects of us, and also even as far as the rest of the world is concerned, they really want from the Jewish people to be that, you call it the light unto the nations, in the sense that we're living up to who we are supposed to be. And when we do, they respect that. It's interesting. I was watching some footage of some YouTuber, I think an Arab guy, walking through Jerusalem. He was I think walking through the Arab part, right? And showing different places. But at some point, he came to a neighborhood where there's a lot of Orthodox Jews there, and there were a bunch of like high school girls walking through, and he commented on how modestly they're dressed. And it's interesting. I mean, this is a guy who was obviously, all, rah-rah Palestinian, and the Jews are occupiers and all these things. But he was impressed positively by the modest dress of these high school girls. That's something that they appreciate. And when they see a Jew who's doing the right thing as far as what Torah expects of us, they respect that. They see that and appreciate it.
Where does the idea that a person is Jewish from his mother come from? And that a person is Jewish even if they weren't brought up that way?
So what we're saying now goes to that point of this idea that you're Jewish even if you weren't brought up Jewish. The idea that follows the mother is based on primarily on the book of Ezra, where it's implied, talks about these Jewish men who would marry non-Jewish women, and that was considered, bringing down God's wrath, that they weren't following the Torah, and they were told to send away the women with their children, which implied that the children also were not considered Jewish. So we learn from there that idea that it follows the mother. There's an allusion to it also in the Torah itself, but that's where you see it most clearly. But this idea that you're Jewish even if you don't keep anything, and even if you weren't brought up Jewish, actually goes to this idea of ontology. In other words, saying that being Jewish is not a matter of what you do. We could look at it as being, if being Jewish was a matter of how you lived and what you did, then you would say that any person, regardless of what background they have, and why does it really matter, right? If somebody wants to become an EMT, does it matter if they're Pakistani, or if they're British, or if they're Canadian? It doesn't matter, right? If you learn what you have to learn, and you do the things, and you go out there and you help people, beautiful. Nobody cares who you are, right? Because it's about the action. And if there was a robot that could do that, then lives would still be saved, right? So the particular acts, wearing tzitzit, wearing the tzitzit on your garments, putting on tefillin, resting on Shabbat, eating kosher. These are not. It's not a matter that if you do those things, then you're Jewish, or if you don't do them, then you're not, right? It's the opposite. If you're Jewish, then you're meant to do them, and if you do them, then they have a special significance. You are doing the will of God. You are bringing God's holiness into the world. If a non-Jew puts on tefillin, it's like a non-Jew putting on a baseball cap. It doesn't have any, cosmic significance. Now they're connected to God in a new way. So the there's a verse in the Torah that says, Moshe tells the Jewish people, he says, it is not because you are so much more numerous than the other nations that God chose you, that God desired you and God chose you, because in fact you are the least of all the nations. Rather, it is because of God's love for you and because God was keeping the oath that he made to your forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, and that is meant to be a humbling statement, right? Don't think that the reason why God chose you is because you're so great. So being chosen is not a matter of being better. It's not a matter of greatness. It's coming from God's side. And even if you're a lowlife, he still chose you, but that's his business. It doesn't make you better. And the source of it is God's keeping the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that is a key point, that God has an account with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and we're the beneficiaries of that account. Not not that there's something special about us per se, but when we appreciate the difference between Jew and non-Jew, that being Jewish is a different category, so to speak, then that helps us also not to lose our identity among the rest of the world, not to be, to allow ourselves to be persuaded when they tell us that we're wrong, because we have an appreciation. We're not just the same as everybody else, and therefore you could say, well, that course of action is not the right course of action, or if you do that, then you're whatever. Then you're not okay. You have to be doing this. It goes to the very core of our identity. The mitzvahs are a stage that comes after being Jewish. In other words, a Jewish person is supposed to keep the mitzvahs. Now, they may or they may not. That's its own question, right? But it's not that keeping the mitzvah makes you Jewish. This topic actually is something that the reason why it's worth spending so much time on it at this moment is because it goes through the whole of Tanya. These concepts are going to come back, so it's good to take an evening and really discuss it. So, okay, I want to, and I don't even know if I'm going to get through all of this, but I want to actually directly preface what's being said over here, so that we should not misunderstand it. Because what he's about to say is that the souls of the nations of the world come from the realms of the opaque Kelipahs, the entirely impure Kelipahs that have no good in them. So this is a very strong statement, and it's a very jarring statement, especially to modern ears. So, I want to make a number of points to get to this. First of all, let's talk for a moment about what he said over here, that the good that is in the nature, that is in the inborn nature of a Jewish person comes from Kelipah, comes from the translucent Kelipah. In other words, good does not necessarily equal holy or godly, right? So what's the difference between holy good? What's the difference between if somebody does an act of charity, which is a mitzvah in the Torah, and does it as a godly act, or someone does an act of charity and it's a Kelipah act? It's somehow unholy. It might not be in the act itself, but it's in the extent that the act goes. So a person can have natural kindness, and they'll do kindness for others, but it wouldn't go as far as to do it at their own expense. In other words, I feel for others and I want to do for them, but what happens if that means that I'm going to lose? In order to be able to do something that is beyond yourself, that takes, right? That is not natural. Our nature, the first rule in our nature is self-preservation. Our nature never requires of us, never asks of us, never moves us to do something that would cause us to lose. So that's the difference between holy goodness and unholy goodness. It can be an act of kindness, but if it would stop at, this is at my expense, this is somehow going to negatively impact me, then that's coming from our nature, and that's not holy. Holy act of kindness is where you're able to go beyond that, to do even even at your own expense. What he's going to talk about in the next part is that there is another kind of goodness, which is the goodness of the completely impure Kelipahs, where there's also goodness, but there it's self-centered goodness. It actually benefits me. So that's okay. So I think that it's important to make a number of clarifications over here so that we appreciate what is being said and what is not being said in Tanya over here, which I think in some ways actually softens it compared to other Jewish thinking. I feel like in some ways, at least in some views, even among Orthodox, even in Orthodox views, or even in, I would say, Torah-based views, there is a sense or a concept that even a Jew can become, completely removed from the Jewish people to the extent that they no longer fit into this category of chosen or having a godly soul, or whatever words we'll use for it. And I think that really is one of the key reasons why this is important in Tanya, to emphasize that this is true of every Jew, regardless of who they are or what they do. And I think that is more of the emphasis, rather than to denigrate other people. Okay, so if I can, I want to run through a number of points, and we'll probably have to go back over them, or some of them at least next time. But let's at least try to get there. So, number one, when we're talking about the uniqueness of the Jewish soul, that is expressed primarily in the capacity for self-sacrifice to sanctify God's name, martyrdom for God's name. Basically, as has happened numerous times throughout Jewish history, where Jews were given the choice between converting to another religion or being killed, and they chose to be killed rather than to convert. So that is not the everyday experience of a person, and indeed, when it comes to behavior, and lifestyle, it's possible for a Jew not to express their godly soul at all. But that's the key point where there's this difference. Second point to make is that he says over here that there's no good whatsoever in this in the souls of the nations of the world. This is referring to the majority, and most people would fit into this category, especially as we'll see later, that you can do good even within this category. It doesn't mean that they don't they don't do good. But especially at times when anti-Semitism becomes more popular, you begin to see that a lot of people are, they're happy to not be bothered by it, and not necessarily to stand up and stand out. It's a good example of doing good at your own expense. And arguably, the experience of Jews in America is different from the experience of Jews in other parts of the world, and historically. So we're a lot of the non-Jews that we come in contact with actually would fit into the category of those who actually, that their souls are from the Kelipah Nova, from the translucent Kelipah, that their animal soul is the same as that of a Jewish person's animal soul. In other words, this applies. The exception to this rule is those who are considered the pious among the Gentiles, which generally means those that accept the 7 Noahide laws, but basically those that do lead a pious and godly life. And so this is not a blanket statement about every single non-Jew, but it's certainly, if we look around, if we think about the world in general, a lot of people certainly can conceivably be in this category where we say that there's no good in them whatsoever. Even then, when we say that there's no good in them, doesn't mean that there's no good whatsoever. Can't be. God creates everybody. Anybody who exists and who lives is living because there's a godly spark in them. But it's hidden in a way that's very different from the way it is in the animalistic soul of a Jewish person, or of somebody who is of the righteous among the Gentiles. There's also a very important point in this context that this kind of statement is the consequence of it is not to say, God forbid, that anybody is subhuman or somehow deserving of being mistreated. It's just a question of knowing who we are and what our part to play in God's purpose in the world is. But we have to treat every human being with with dignity, and appreciate that they're God's creation, and that's not right. That's not the I think that people use this kind of statement to accuse us of that kind of thing, because that's the kind of thing that's happened in the reverse, where various peoples have developed ideas by saying that Jews are somehow different, and therefore it's okay to attack them and to mistreat them and to deny them rights or whatever it is. So that's an important point as well. Also, just to emphasize that in this discussion, even though we use the term inborn, we're not talking about a biological difference. And biologically, there isn't, right? A human being is a human being. We're talking about a soul difference. And this soul difference is based on standing at Mount Sinai and accepting the Torah. That the Jewish people accepted the Torah, and therefore we were endowed by God with a divine soul. And likewise, if somebody converts, that's their Matan Torah. That's their Sinai moment when they accept the Torah and are endowed with a divine soul, which enables them to fulfill the commandments and to that should be their way of fulfilling God's will. So this is not it's not a blood matter, not a DNA matter. It's a soul matter. Actually, the Rebbe commented in the letter. He says this is the response to those that want to compare the difference between Jewish souls and non-Jewish souls to the concept of racism. He says The idea of racism is saying that there's a biological difference between this people and that people, and therefore they're less human or something. This has nothing to do with humanity. In fact, and this is the point that I've been making with the saying the animalistic soul, is that we're not saying that having this soul or having a soul, an animalistic soul that's of the three impure klipot makes you an animal. Doesn't make you. It's not an unhuman soul. That's exactly the human soul. This is exactly what a human being is. What the Arizal is teaching, and this is really what the Torah is teaching, is that God enables us through the godly soul to achieve something greater. So, in general, the purpose of the peoples of the world, of all the nations of the world, is, as it says in the book of Yeshaya, of Isaiah, it says, God did not create the world for tohu, for void, for nothingness, but rather that it should be settled, that it should be civilized. A person's job in the world is to make the world a civilized place, to make it a place where people can live and thrive and grow and produce technology and innovation and do good for each other and so forth. The purpose of the Jewish people is found in the term Goy Echad Ba'aretz. We are a unique nation in the land. Chassidus explains that means that we are a nation that brings the concept of Echad, the concept of God's oneness, into the world. We have to bring something beyond the world into the world. So that's why there is this distinction. And finally, I think the most important part is, like they say, the proof is in the pudding, or more accurately, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If you look at the way that the Rebbe, who is the most recent embodiment of the teachings of Tanya, the way he treated non-Jews, it was with the utmost of respect. It was with care for them, both in the campaign for the 7 Noahide laws, as well as just in general. His encouragement of others. There's many wonderful stories about it, which we don't have time to get into. That he definitely did not take or teach an approach to non-Jews as being one of dismissal or denigration, but on the contrary, as people that I'll just say personally, one of the things that I noticed that is, I think, emblematic of this is the way that in the Rebbe's presence, he didn't believe that anybody was a so-called fly on the wall. There's no such thing as, if you are present, you are part of this. When the Rebbe would leave, would leave the building to go to, get in the car to go wherever he was, to the oil or whatever, he would always wave at the cops that were standing on the side. During the Farbrengens, they were TV cameramen that were broadcasting it on cable TV. Invariably, at some point, the Farbrengen, the Rebbe turned to them to make a l'chaim. Like in most situations, the cameraman is completely ignored. You're not here, right? Your job is to right, to get the footage. You're not part of this scene. So, and these were people who probably were not Jewish, or didn't matter if they were Jewish. There's a beautiful picture of that a Japanese photographer got of the Rebbe. Well, we talk about it another time. But point is that she was standing behind the Rebbe up in the women's section, and the Rebbe turned around to give her a roll of dimes for charity, like he was giving to other people. In other words, you're here. You're part of the celebration. You're part of what's going on here. So, so we have to, also judge the idea by what the result of it is. We still haven't gotten to the Tanya itself, but that has to be next time. All right.